Hello and welcome back to TOS Tutorial. Today I'm going to give you all summaries of what the allegiances are like, a bit of their lore, and what each of their commanders can offer. To keep these videos to a reasonable length, these will just be summaries, and I'll break it down by book. So today, I'll talk about the allegiances and commanders in their core rulebook, King's Empire, Gibbering Hordes, Abyssinia, and Cult of the Burning Man. I'll cover this book's dual allegiance commanders at the end. First off, the King's Empire. In this version of history, they were controlled by the Viennese Guild of Mercantilers until 1904, when King Edward VII, backed with mountains of smuggled soulstones, declared independence from them. 2 years later, they're now dealing with a ton of the Gibbering Hordes and cultists that the Burning Man dropped on top of London, and are trying to return to something like normal for them. Aesthetically, they're pretty much exactly what you think when I say World War I England. They do have some extra flavor in some of their units, like the mobile assassin Margaret Belle, or their motor scout, which is just a velocipede with a machine gun strapped to the front. So what are the King's Empire like in-game? Well, they're very gun-oriented in general, as almost all of their units have a long-range missile action. They also specialize in resource denial, handing out pin tokens to the enemy to deny enemy reinforcing or moving. Their spycraft and intel-themed units can also do things like mess with the enemy's hand and place new objective markers mid-battle. Their Allegiance Box commander is Charles Edmonton. He's a sniper who specializes in killing champions at range and supporting his nearby squad's shooting, boosting their range and giving them extra shots. In Glory, he can also teleport very long ranges, giving him some really interesting angles for game-changing shots. Margaret Belle represents the spycraft side of the Allegiance. She's hypermobile, with very high base speed and a free teleport on her activations, making her an ideal objective runner when she's not busy stabbing. Just like Charles, she excels at killing champions, but she does it in melee and can make it very reliable by shutting down some of the enemy's defensive tricks. The Gibbering Hordes are a strange one lore-wise. They're technically an invading force, spreading themselves all over Earth, but they didn't mean or even really want to end up here. That was just Burning Man shenanigans. They're worshippers of one of Malifaux's tyrants, Meridian, who whispers to them in that world's oceans, and some of them seem to want to spread her worship to humans too, forcibly if need be. Aesthetically, they're a weird mix of aquatic lizard, bug, and fish-like things. They're made up of stuff like the Frenzy, who are a gang of bipedal sharks, barbed crawlers, who are like spiky frogs, and Carcanoi, which are like the meanest centipedes you've ever seen. On the board, the Hordes have plenty of brutal melee units, but they have very few ranged attacks. They let you pretend you have hundreds of minis while actually having a reasonable number by endlessly summoning back killed squads. They also put out lots of terrain called tide pools that they get benefits from and can hurt their enemies. The Stormsiren is the Horde's Allegiance Box commander. She focuses on board control as she makes more tide pools and also makes them way more dangerous to the enemy. She can also force enemies to walk into her tide pools, blasting them with strong passive damage. The Street Sharks, or rather the Frenzy on the other hand, are all about speed and classic melee murder. They're a squad of 3 fire teams, so killing the whole unit is a nightmare for your opponent. They have ways to take a ton of actions on their activation, and each melee action is a real threat. Before they get into a fight, they can also move all nearby friendly fire teams, letting you fly up the board. The second Earth Allegiance in the book is Abyssinia. In this version of history, they're based in the Horn of Africa, but are expanding to try and put all of Africa under one banner. They're also one of the few major societal players who aren't beholden to the Guild, as they found a temporary breach to Malifaux centuries ago that they used to grab tons of soulstones from and trigger a scientific golden age. Their Emperor Ziriski is taking active steps to fight for a peaceful future Earth-wide, even sending his own son, Prince Unathi, into battle. Aesthetically, they're a mix of big stompy robots and armored soldiers with some nice aesthetic touches. Their 2 mini-titans, the Walker and the Cutter, are basically one-man power suits, and the Lord of Steel has a jetpack and a huge spear. They just have so many good-looking units. This is the Elite High-Tech Allegiance. They have the most titans available to them, generally good AVs, lots of ways to draw free cards, and get extra actions from their prototype assets. But to compensate for this, their squads are generally more expensive than anyone else's. Their Allegiance Box commander, Prince Unathi, is primarily support. His job is to make sure his elite squads can do their jobs. He does this by letting his units use their prototype actions more often, and can move and reinforce squads on demand. He also has a decent rocket launcher with built-in area for when you need to blast a bunch of enemies off the board. The Lord of Steel is Abyssinia's mobile commander. He's brutally powerful in melee, with one of the highest potential strengths in the game, and is impossible to pin down thanks to his easy teleport. One thing that makes him especially unique is that he makes all of his stratagems cheaper while he's alive, letting his company do things more efficiently. Last, but certainly not least, we have the Cult of the Burning Man. The Burning Man is a ruined husk of a tyrant with no control over what it does anymore, spreading a twisted worship of itself like a wildfire. The prophet Ephraim Wade wrote about his visions of the Burning Man in a book years ago, and when the Burning Man did come, copies of that book started spreading the same worship. The cult has different names all over the world, but are generally themed around suns, like Mexico's fourth sun and Egypt's cult of Ra. Aesthetically, the cult is the body horror faction that can make Cronenberg proud. Some of their units still look like normal humans, but most are humans that got twisted into monsters or things that come from the space between worlds. They also have 3 squads that include some of the same models at different points in their corruption, which is really cool. In-game, the cult is generally full of high-mobility glass cannons. They put down portal markers and can hop between them effortlessly, making them hard to pin down. They also hand out shaken tokens, like it's candy, both to enemies and themselves. Interestingly, they also have several units that mill their own fate deck for various benefits. Their Allegiance Box commander is Adeodatos, formerly known as the Prophet Ephraim Wade, and he is definitely thinking with portals. He gives the cult more portal markers to put around the board, punishes the enemy if they stand near them, and can teleport friendly units to himself. Fenton Brahms is what the cult thinks support looks like. He loves to hand out shaken tokens to units near him, friendly or enemy, and he can also yell at friendly squads to make them take extra actions. Both of his offensive actions have ways to mill your own deck to get some RNG damage spikes, with Disintegrating Blast having the highest potential strength in the game if you mill the right cards. So that's all of the 1 Allegiance commanders, leaving us with the 2 dual Allegiance ones. Remember that I'm doing this by book, so the allegiances that I've talked about do have other commanders, but we'll cover those in their own book. For now, let's start Earthside. Kassa Okoye is an interesting support commander, as she's all about Titans. She spends most of the game giving Titans more actions and repairing them. When she's in a pinch, she has her own machine gun too. She brings lots of card draw and tactics tokens to both of her allegiances. On the other hand, Horomatangi mixes it up by being a commander who is a Titan. Just being near him hurts enemy units, and he cuts through assets like paper in melee. He can also yell at friendly or enemy units, handing out whatever tokens he wants, and can take extra actions from his unit and asset cards, making him very flexible. Both of his allegiances love how he can hand out tokens on demand, and he brings the coolness factor to your table too. Alright, and that's all of the commanders from the core rulebook. Next week we'll get into the new goodies, covering the allegiances and commanders in the first expansion, Beyond the Other Side. Until then, happy gaming!